3 hours ago, I reviewed a preliminary assessment that did not yet carry confirmation. It was a pattern: fragmented signals, partial radar tracks, disrupted communications across multiple sectors inside Iran. At that time, it was still ambiguous. Now it is not. What we are seeing at this moment is the consolidation of those early indicators into a coherent operational picture. Multiple strike packages, coordinated timing, deep penetration, and most importantly, intent. I spent just over 3 decades inside military intelligence structures, much of that time in roles where fragmented data like this had to be interpreted under pressure. Access to classified assessments, operational briefings, and strategic planning rooms shapes how you read events like these. You learn to distinguish noise from structure. And this, what has just unfolded, is structure. This is not just an operation. This is a structural shift. Israel has conducted more than 50 airstrikes across multiple locations inside Iran. Not symbolic, not limited. This was a distributed, multi-axis strike campaign designed to test, degrade, and signal simultaneously. Let me walk you through what that actually means. The first indicator suggests the operation began shortly after 02:10 local time. Initial wave composition appears to have included approximately 18 to 22 strike aircraft, operating in coordinated packages, supported by standoff munitions, launched from outside Iranian airspace. These were not random targets. The sequencing matters. The first wave focused on air defense suppression, radar installations, early warning nodes, command relays. The goal was not total destruction. The goal was temporary blindness. Within the first 14 minutes, at least 12 radar sites experienced disruption, either through direct strike or electronic interference. That created a corridor, not a permanent one, a timed one. The second wave followed within a 20-minute window. This is where the operation shifted from access to impact. Approximately 25 to 30 strike points were engaged during this phase. Targets likely included logistics depots, missile storage facilities, and limited infrastructure nodes associated with Iran's regional force projection. This matters, because when you see this kind of sequencing, suppression followed by precision targeting, you are not looking at a demonstration. You are looking at a rehearsal under live conditions. The third phase, which is still being assessed, appears to have involved standoff munitions targeting hardened or previously missed objectives. These are the strikes that extend duration. Total engagement time from first impact to final strike, approximately 90 to 110 minutes. This was controlled. This was timed. This was deliberate. Now, here's the part I need you to understand. On paper, Iran's air defense network is layered, redundant, and regionally integrated. Multiple radar bands, overlapping missile systems, indigenous platforms combined with adapted foreign systems. On paper, penetration at this scale should be difficult. In reality, penetration occurred. This was not a failure of technology. It was a failure of doctrine. Let me explain why. Defensive systems are built on assumptions, timing assumptions, threat vector assumptions, engagement priority algorithms. When multiple strike packages arrive from different vectors within compressed timelines, those assumptions begin to break. You create decision saturation. Radar operators must classify targets. Command system must assign interceptors. Launch units must engage, reload, and re-engage. Each of those steps introduces delay. Seconds matter. Now multiply that across 50-plus strike events. Even a highly capable system begins to fragment under that load. Reload cycles are rarely discussed outside professional circles, but they are critical. Interceptor systems do not have infinite capacity. Once a battery expends its ready missiles, it requires time to rearm. That creates windows. Small windows, but windows nonetheless. This was known, this was documented, and it was exploited. Now let's talk about the technology involved, because without understanding that, the scale of this operation can be misunderstood. Modern airstrike campaigns rely heavily on standoff munitions. These are precision-guided weapons launched from distances that keep aircraft outside the most dangerous engagement zones. They use a combination of inertial navigation, satellite guidance, and in some cases, terrain matching systems. What that means in practical terms is this: the aircraft does not need to fly directly over the target. It needs to get close enough. That difference matters. In addition, electronic warfare plays a central role. Jamming systems degrade radar clarity. Decoys create false targets. Communication disruption isolates defensive nodes from central command. So when you hear that 50-plus airstrikes occurred, you should not imagine 50 isolated explosions. You should imagine a layered system being stressed at multiple points simultaneously. And that stress creates failure. Not total failure, but sufficient failure. Now we move to the question of response. Tehran has signaled a full-scale response. That phrase is not casual. It is chosen deliberately. But here is where the analysis becomes more complex. Why has there not been an immediate, large-scale retaliation? Why the pause? Why the silence? I have seen this pattern before. The silence is the signal. Immediate retaliation is emotionally satisfying but strategically risky. Iran operates within a framework that prioritizes calibrated escalation. Response timing is part of the weapon system. Let me give you 3 questions that define what happens next. First, what level of damage was actually sustained? No reported damage. Real operational degradation. Second, what response achieves deterrence without triggering uncontrollable escalation? Third, what role will external actors play if escalation crosses a certain threshold? These are not theoretical questions. They are being evaluated in real time. From a military standpoint, Iran has multiple response options. Ballistic missile strikes, regional proxy activation, maritime disruption, cyber operations. Each option carries different escalation risks. A direct missile response against Israeli territory is the most visible. It is also the most escalatory. A regional response through aligned groups creates pressure without immediate attribution escalation. A maritime response, particularly in critical choke points, introduces global economic consequences. And that is where the calculus shifts. Because now you are no longer dealing with a bilateral conflict. You are dealing with a system-wide risk. Which brings us to the broader issue: policy failure. This outcome was not sudden. It was built over decades. Strategic assumptions accumulated over time. Each side developed doctrines based on previous conflicts. Deterrence models were constructed on patterns that no longer hold under current technological conditions. On paper, deterrence framework suggested that large-scale direct strikes would remain unlikely due to escalation risks. In reality, those thresholds have been tested and crossed. This was known, this was documented, but it was not adjusted for. There's also an over-reliance on technological superiority as a stabilizing factor. Advanced systems create confidence. Confidence can create rigidity, and rigidity reduces adaptability. I have sat in rooms where these assumptions were discussed, where alternative scenarios were considered and then deprioritized. That is the nature of institutional thinking. Now we are seeing the consequences. At the global level, this event carries implications that extend far beyond the immediate actors. Regional powers are observing. Carefully. Major global actors are recalculating. Quietly. The concept of a controlled escalation environment is being tested under real conditions. If that concept fails, the implications extend into every region where similar deterrence models exist. This is not just about one strike campaign. This is about the credibility of escalation management itself. For the United States, the challenge is immediate but constrained. Direct involvement increases escalation risk. Non-involvement affects credibility. Every option carries cost. For other global powers, this becomes a case study, a live demonstration of how modern precision warfare interacts with legacy deterrence models. This matters, because the world is no longer operating under a single dominant framework. It is moving toward a more fragmented, multipolar structure. In that environment, localized conflicts carry global weight. Now let me step back and address something that is often overlooked. The difference between capability and will. Military capability defines what can be done. Political will defines what will be done. These are not always aligned. History shows us that conflicts are rarely decided by capability alone. They are decided by the intersection of capability, perception, and decision-making under pressure. I have seen situations where overwhelming capability existed but was not used. And I have seen situations where limited capability was used with a decisive effect. That difference matters. There's also a personal dimension to this analysis that I do not often speak about. There were moments, years ago, when similar scenarios were discussed in planning environments. Hypothetical models, war games, simulations. At the time, many of us believed that certain thresholds would hold, that escalation would remain contained within defined limits. Looking at this now, I am not entirely certain those assumptions were correct. That is not a comfortable realization, but it is an honest one. So where does this leave us? We are at a point where tactical actions are beginning to reshape strategic frameworks. The line between demonstration and escalation is becoming less distinct. What we are witnessing is not just an exchange of strikes, it is a recalibration of limits. And that brings us to the final point. The question is not simply what happens next. It is whether the systems designed to prevent escalation are still capable of functioning under current conditions. If they are not, then every subsequent action carries greater uncertainty. And uncertainty, in this context, is not neutral. It is destabilizing. So I will leave you with this. We are watching a moment that will be studied for years, not because of the number of strikes, but because of what those strikes reveal about the structure beneath them. If you are analyzing this seriously, share your assessment, not for visibility, but for clarity. Disagreement is part of understanding. Because the real question is not what the next move will be. The real question is whether the framework guiding those moves is still intact. You have not enough humanizer words left. Upgrade your surfer plan.